Picture a locked garage door, rusted hinges, paint peeling at the edges, the kind of door that someone deliberately decided one day to stop opening. When a team of property auditors pulled back the doors to one of the storage garages at Neverland Ranch in the years following Michael Jackson's death, they weren't expecting art history. They weren't expecting grief. They were expecting dust and maybe a broken lawnmower. Instead, they found a 1999 Rolls-Royce Silver Seraph with an interior custom built to resemble the Palace of Versailles, gold everywhere, crystals on the trim, parked next to a 1986 GMC fire truck with working hoses and flashing red lights, which was parked next to a golf cart hand-painted with Michael Jackson dressed as Peter Pan. 3 vehicles, 3 completely different ideas of what a person could be. And that, in a strange way, is the whole story. Michael Jackson was many things. The most commercially successful entertainer who ever lived. A man who spent $17 million in 1988 to build a private fantasy kingdom on 2,700 acres of California hillside. A man who, in the last months of his life, was sleeping in a rented mansion in Holmby Hills, paying $100,000 a month in rent, rehearsing for a comeback tour he was privately terrified he could not physically survive, and after he died on June 25, 2009, the things he left behind told a story that no biography had managed to capture while he was alive. The cars in the garage, the notes on the chalkboard, the items in boxes that were never meant to be seen by anyone else. Today we go through all of it, the kingdom he built from nothing. To understand what they found in that garage, and why it matters, you have to go back to 1988, when Michael Jackson was 30 years old, standing at the absolute peak of his commercial power, and decided to do something no artist had ever done. He bought the sky. He purchased 2,700 acres in the Santa Ynez Valley near Los Olivos, California, for $17 million. Then he hired top architects and hundreds of construction workers, and spent 2 full years turning that land into something that did not exist anywhere else on Earth. He named it Neverland Valley Ranch, after J.M. Barrie's island where boys never grow old. What he built there had a full-scale amusement park with a Ferris wheel, a carousel, and bumper cars, a 50-seat private movie theater, a zoo stocked with chimpanzees, giraffes, an orangutan, and a collection of exotic reptiles, a train station, a real one with a working steam locomotive, that looped around the entire property. The main house had a 2-story master bedroom with 3 bathrooms and a 2-story library. He filled the grounds with statues of fairy children. He placed an animatronic fortune-teller grandmother in a corner of the main house. He commissioned a robotic replica of his own head, valued at around $2,400. He had a throne custom-built for $1,800. He commissioned a painting of himself as the Pied Piper, leading a line of children through an open field. People who saw these objects later, after his death, reacted to them very differently depending on what they already believed about the man. But all of them agreed on one thing: Neverland was not a normal place. It was the physical expression of a psychology that operated on a completely different frequency from the rest of the world. The question was never whether Michael Jackson was strange. The question was always, what was he running from? The cars and what they said. Now, back to that garage. Because the vehicles Michael Jackson kept at Neverland say something very specific about how his mind worked and how fundamentally divided his interior life was. Start with the most ordinary item in the collection, a 1988 GMC Jimmy High Sierra Classic. Not glamorous, not custom, just a truck. The kind of vehicle you'd see in a high school parking lot. Michael Jackson, a man who at his peak was generating hundreds of millions of dollars, owned a plain GMC Jimmy and apparently wanted to. Alongside it sat a 1985 Mercedes-Benz 500 SEL that he'd kept for years, driving it from his house in Encino to the recording studio in Los Angeles long before Neverland existed. That Mercedes was practical. It was the car of a man who, at his core, just needed to get somewhere. And then, sitting next to those ordinary vehicles, was the 1999 Rolls-Royce Silver Seraph. Jackson had personally requested that the interior be designed to resemble the Palace of Versailles. 24-karat gold trim, crystals throughout the cabin, a 5.4-liter V12 engine under the hood. This was not a car, this was a declaration that the king of pop was, in his own imagination, royalty. Then there was the 1990 Rolls-Royce Silver Spur II, a full limousine with a full-service bar, and the 1988 Lincoln Town Car limousine with gray leather and walnut paneling. He had a fleet of limousines at a property he rarely left, but the item that stays with you, the one people remember when they walk through any honest accounting of this collection, is the fire truck. A 1986 GMC High Sierra 3500, converted to full fire truck specifications, functioning hoses, a working water tank, actual flashing red lights. A man who built a fantasy kingdom for himself kept, in his garage, a vehicle that exists specifically to put out fires. The Peter Pan golf cart is the last piece. Custom painted with an image of Michael Jackson as Peter Pan, the boy who refused to grow up, it was used to ride around the Neverland grounds. After his death, it sold at Julien's auctions for between $4,000 and $6,000. Taken together, these aren't just possessions. They are the map of a man who was simultaneously a regular person who drove a plain truck and a fantasy king who needed a Versailles-trimmed car and a fire truck and a Peter Pan golf cart within the same square mile. He was all of those things at once, and Neverland was the only place on Earth where that was architecturally possible. And then, in 2005, it all collapsed. The year Neverland died. The charges came in 2003. A 13-year-old boy named Gavin Arvizo and his family alleged that Michael Jackson had molested him at Neverland Ranch. 70 police officers descended on the property in November of that year, searching the main house, the outbuildings, the storage rooms. What they documented and what they reported became the center of one of the most watched criminal trials in American history. The officers noted specific items in their reports. Life-size child dolls dressed in jeans and sneakers, positioned as though mid-conversation. Disney memorabilia rooms. A finger painting by Macaulay Culkin, who later told Larry King, nothing happened. Culkin described Jackson's two-story bedroom as practically a separate house in itself. You have to understand the whole scenario, Culkin said. I talked to him like he was a normal human being. In June 2005, Michael Jackson was acquitted on all 14 counts. The jury deliberated for 7 days and returned with not guilty across the board, but Jackson himself described what happened to the ranch in terms that sounded less like relief and more like grief. He told a documentary crew that Neverland had been violated by the police search and that he could never bring himself to live there the same way again. He left. In 2006, the property went into foreclosure. By 2007 and 2008, urban explorers who had slipped past the gates described what they found in eerily quiet terms. The amusement rides still stood. The 60-foot crescent moon logos still covered the parking areas and the bumper cars. But there was no one there. Boxes of Pepsi promotional merchandise and fan mail sat untouched. According to accounts published years later, a photograph of the prosecuting attorney from the molestation case was reportedly still lying on a tabletop, with devil's horns drawn on it in marker. Someone had sat inside that enormous empty estate and drawn horns on the face of the man who had tried to send him to prison. That one detail tells you more about Michael Jackson's state of mind in those years than almost any interview he gave. The Last House. He didn't go back to Neverland. Instead, in December 2008, Michael Jackson quietly moved into a French chateau-style mansion at 100 North Carrollwood Drive in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. A 7-bedroom, 13-bathroom estate spanning more than 17,000 square feet. He was renting it for $100,000 a month from clothing manufacturer Hubert Guez and his wife Roxanne. He was 50 years old. He had 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Biji, living with him in that house. And he was rehearsing for a 50-night concert run at the O2 Arena in London called This Is It, slated to begin on July 13, 2009. People close to the production said Jackson was visibly exhausted during rehearsals. There were days he barely moved through the choreography he had performed flawlessly for 3 decades. His private physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, had been engaged to monitor his health around the clock. What Murray was also doing, according to evidence presented later in criminal court, was administering propofol to help Jackson sleep. Every night, in a bedroom, with no clinical monitoring equipment present, Propofol is not a sleep aid. It is a surgical anesthetic used in operating rooms to induce unconsciousness before procedures. It does not produce natural restorative sleep. Administering it outside a clinical setting without proper monitoring is considered extraordinarily dangerous by every standard of medical practice. Multiple anesthesiologists who testified at Murray's trial later said there was no legitimate medical justification for what was happening in that bedroom. On the morning of June 25, 2009, at approximately 12:22 p.m. Pacific Time, Michael Jackson went into cardiac arrest in his bedroom at the Holmby Hills mansion. Murray called 911. Paramedics arrived and transported Jackson to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. He was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled the death a homicide. The official cause, acute propofol intoxication combined with other sedatives. In November 2011, Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison, what they left behind. After Murray's criminal trial concluded, Julien's Auctions sold more than 500 items from the Holmby Hills estate. The total came to close to $1 million. And the inventory of those items reads like an archaeological record of a man in his final months. Surrounded by the mundane alongside the irreplaceable, there was the queen-size bed where he died, his upholstered chairs still smudged with his makeup, a mirror from his bedroom that had a handwritten message on it, a note in his own hand, the exact text of which the buyer has never disclosed, that sold for $25,750. In the kitchen, investigators and then auction workers found a chalkboard where his children had written in their own handwriting 4 words, "I love you, Daddy." That chalkboard sold for $5,000. The rug from beneath his deathbed went for $15,360. The family specifically requested that the headboard of the bed be removed from the auction entirely. Somewhere in that house, investigators also found notes for songs he was still writing. Titles, fragments. A man who had been crafting melodies since he was 11 years old was still, in the weeks before his death, working on new music. The Holmby Hills property itself sold in 2012 for $18.1 million, down from its initial asking price of $23.9 million. The Gies family had spent 3 years trying to find a buyer for a house that had become the site of one of the most famous deaths of the 21st century. Neverland Ranch was eventually acquired in 2020 by real estate investment firm Colony Capital, who had actually saved it from foreclosure back in 2008. At various points it had been listed for $100 million, then reduced to $67 million, then reduced further still. Today it operates under a different name, Sycamore Valley Ranch. The amusement park rides are gone, the animals are gone, the moon logos are presumably still there, painted on the parking areas, waiting for someone who is never coming back. The garage again. So when you return to that garage, the Rolls-Royce with the Versailles interior, the fire truck with the working hoses, the golf cart with Peter Pan on the side, you understand something different than you did 60 minutes ago. Michael Jackson did not fill that garage because he needed transportation. He filled it the same way he filled every room at Neverland, with objects that were trying to hold something together. The ordinary trucks alongside the golden limousines, the practical sitting next to the fantastical, a man perpetually trying to be both the regular kid from Gary, Indiana, who needed a plain GMC to get to the recording studio, and the king of pop who needed his interior to look like a French palace. His 1997 Neoplan touring coach had a porcelain and gold bathroom, leather sofas, and, this is real, a carpet with an embroidered king's crown woven into the floor. A man who spent weeks at a time living on a tour bus made sure there was a crown stitched into the carpet beneath his feet. The Montana Carriage Company electric horse-drawn carriage, commissioned personally by Jackson, had a Neverland Valley decal along its side and came equipped with a CD player and a full sound system. It sold after his death for around $10,000 to help pay down debts. A horse-drawn carriage with a CD player sold to settle outstanding accounts. That sentence contains the entire arc of Michael Jackson's financial life. At his commercial peak, he was worth an estimated $500 million, with assets including a 50-acre stake in Sony ATV Music Publishing, a catalog that included the rights to the Beatles recordings, which he had purchased in 1985 for $47.5 million. At the time of his death, his estate reportedly carried debts exceeding $400 million. The estate has since recovered dramatically through posthumous licensing deals, touring exhibitions, and the continued commercial strength of his music. But in those last 6 months in Holmby Hills, he was rehearsing exhausted for concerts he reportedly dreaded, receiving a surgical anesthetic as a nightly sedative, surrounded by his 3 children in a rented house, while the fantasy kingdom he had spent $17 million to build sat empty and abandoned 330 miles to the north. Nobody made much of what was on the walls of his bedroom at Holmby Hills. Investigators documented it, but it didn't reach the tabloid front pages because there was nothing scandalous about it. There were photographs of children, his family, personal notes about the tour, and the mirror with his own handwriting on it, the message he apparently needed to see every morning when he woke up. We don't know what it said. The buyer paid $25,750 and has stayed silent. The last question: what do you do with someone like this? Someone who was simultaneously the greatest entertainer in the history of recorded music and a man who built a fake kingdom because the real world never felt like a place he could safely exist? Someone acquitted by a jury and condemned by public opinion, and then mourned, genuinely mourned, by hundreds of millions of people the moment he was gone. The garage at Neverland doesn't resolve any of those contradictions. The Versailles Rolls-Royce and the GMC fire truck and the Peter Pan golf cart don't tell you whether Michael Jackson was innocent of the things he was accused of. They don't tell you whether it would have been a triumph or a disaster. They don't tell you what the note on the mirror said. What they do tell you, what all of it tells you, the chalkboard with the children's handwriting, the abandoned throne, the stacks of unopened fan mail, the robotic replica of his own head sitting in some room at Neverland, is that he was trying. Whatever else he was, whatever he did or didn't do, he was a person who tried every single day of his adult life to construct around himself something that would hold. A place where ordinary and extraordinary could coexist in the same garage. A place where being famous and being a father and being lonely and being Peter Pan could all be true at the same time. He called it Neverland. And then he left it and never went back. Here's what I want to know from you. When you think about Michael Jackson now, not the music, not the legal history, but the actual human being, does the private world he built make him more sympathetic to you or more impossible to understand? Leave that in the comments. I want to see where people actually land on this one. If stories like this are what you come here for, one person, their full story, no shortcuts, subscribe. There's a new one every week.